This is a disgraceful situation. This is an Attorney General, Letitia, that went out and campaigned on, I will get Trump. I will get Trump no matter what. I'll get Trump. I promise I'll get him. We have 2 tapes on her now that have come out since the trial because people took tapes of her because they couldn't believe her ranting and raving like a lunatic. But just as the Attorney General of New York State, Letitia James, and she shouldn't be allowed to be Attorney General. She's defrauded the public with this trial.
Any thoughts?
It's just bogus. It's foolishness. It's frankly, it's reckless. The president's just being put up here because it's political and they just want to get Trump. And it's really unfortunate. I've been saying a lot. You can be for President Trump or against President Trump. Those are matters of politics. Americans, we're allowed to have those disagreements. But when you use the criminal justice system like this to get your political opponent, that's when you really degrade what American values are supposed to be, what American justice is supposed to be. It makes us look foolish on the world stage, and it's really destructive internally of our country and of our political system.
I kind of feel like it's exactly what China and Russia want. If you think about it, to your point about the world stage. So we look foolish. Do you think a genie's been let out of the bottle, so to speak, in this one? I mean, what's to stop any DA anywhere in the country from going after anyone on a national level?
I think it has, and I think that genie's out of the bottle. And what it's going to take is serious people on both sides of the aisle to put it back. Look, it's important to state nobody's above the law. Nobody.
Right.
But we've also seen in the history of the country that presidents and former high-level officials have been, quote unquote, let off the hook because prosecutors or DAs thought it would be very damaging. I mean, look, Bill Clinton, he perjured himself in front of a grand jury. They didn't bring charges on him to indict him. They took his law license so he couldn't practice law. That's what they did. James Comey famously said, no reasonable prosecutor would try to indict Hillary Clinton on the Espionage Act, even though she violated it. That's what he said. I'm assuming James Comey thinks that Alvin Bragg is a reasonable prosecutor because what they're going after here are bookmaking irregularities based upon a federal crime that doesn't exist because the federal agencies who have jurisdiction never pursued a crime and actually said there's nothing to see here. And to be specific on that, the Federal Election Commission actually heard this. They went through this matter and they voted 4-1 not to go after and move forward with charges or a fine or anything like that. And if you get a 4-1 vote on the FEC, what it means is that you had Republicans and Democrats agree that this is not something to pursue. So
in other words, politics on steroids.
100%.
With a dangerous precedent. Let me turn to what's going on in the financial markets. Look, I mean, the Fed is printing again. Art Laffer just came out with a study. He looked at the numbers. Art Laffer, who is the former economic advisor, of course, during the Reagan administration, remembered for his so-called Laffer curve and a big proponent of lower taxes in order to yield more revenue and give more sort of to the people, if you would. Anyway, he was looking at the numbers this morning and he said, look, there's like 400 trillion more that the Federal Reserve just added in terms of quantitative easing. They were supposed to be tightening. That may explain in part why gold is soaring. I also think gold is one of those safe haven plays that people look towards in an environment where things are really kind of rocky. And this one's rocky. I know that you are on the Financial Services Committee. Walk me through what's happening as we look towards finding some solution here on our debt and deficits, because as far as the eye can see, it's not looking good.
Well, first with the Fed, this new discount window that they used to help bank balance sheets, by what I've been able to grasp and understand, is that banks have been going out and borrowing this money from the Fed. Well, the Fed just doesn't get that money from anywhere. They got to try to find a way to create it in order to lend it to the banks. And I think that's what Art Laffer is talking about there with this new liquidity that's now coming into the system. That's number one. Number two, Washington has actually made matters worse with the massive overspending in response to COVID-19. And I know at the time people were concerned about our economy, the CARES Act, et cetera. But the stuff that Joe Biden did, the American Rescue Plan, the Inflation Reduction Act, or like I like to call it, the Green New Deal's little brother, because that's really what the bill is. All those spending items that they did and they put together, all that did was inject massive amounts of fiscal stimulus into an economy that didn't need it. Our economy in 2021 was already ready to get back on it because states were beginning to reopen. People were going back to work. People had money in their bank accounts because of COVID stimulus through the CARES Act. And there was pent up demand for people just to travel, live life again. All these things were going to happen. Mm-hmm. And then we dumped in another $2.5 trillion of federal spending. I think the Federal Reserve saw this and they said, well, you know what? Let's start to tighten our balance sheet, which, by the way, they should. And they just need to do it quickly. Because if you take a longer run view, since the financial collapse back in 2008, the Fed's balance sheet went from what, 900 billion to 9 trillion. They left rates
largest increase ever.
Yeah, I mean, so we've had cheap money for 14 years, a massive Fed balance sheet. The world shuts down. You do the CARES Act money, bipartisan. I think people largely agreed with it. And because you had no economic activity, there was needed an injection to kind of keep things stabilized.
Sure, at that time. But then to your point, at some point, the world reopened. Mm-hmm. They had vaccines out there. People had the ability to go back to work, but they were incentivized in some ways not to. There was so much money just sort of flowing through the system. And to your point, pent up demand. It was driving me crazy at the time, Congressman, because I actually called major inflation. I said, we're going to be looking at double digits, which we did get on the producer price index. I said that in August of 2020. And this was when President Trump came out with his second stimulus check. I'm like, whoa, wait a second. You can't have both of these guys working together, the Fed and, you can't have the fiscal and monetary policy simultaneously. And then sure enough, Joe Biden comes in, he issues another check. And then to your point, comes up with multiple programs, including the Inflation Reduction Act, which I love that title. It just kind of cracks me up, which just created more and more inflation. Yeah. Now we got OPEC cutting. Unexpectedly, oil prices are moving up. So we'll probably get more inflation along with, whatever quantitative easing the Fed needs to do to save us from this banking crisis. This is like one big mess.
It is one big mess. And so when people are going to flee to safety, namely gold, there's one of the big reasons for that is we're 31.5 trillion in debt. We still haven't figured out our debt ceiling fights on Capitol Hill. If I was an investor and I'm looking for a safe haven, do I want U.S. Treasuries or do I want gold? Well, I'm going to gold because I gotta go somewhere.
Okay, that's interesting to me. I mean, I'm in both because I love safety and I was fortunate enough to get some Treasuries before the yield started going down. But that's interesting. You actually feel like gold is safer than Treasuries right now?
I think there's some merit to it because if you look at what the president's budget proposal is, and his budget's dead on arrival, but his budget proposal would have us move to $52 trillion in debt over a decade. At some point, even America, as strong as our economy is, as dynamic as it is, at some point, we're going to struggle with repaying, forget the debt itself, the interest. We're estimating that interest payments, CBO's estimates, are $1.5 trillion by 2033. That's more than we spend on the military today. It's more than we spend on domestic programs today. That would just go to paying interest on the debt. And if you have us having to spend so much money just to make interest payments to the bond markets, it squeezes out so many other things in our economy. That would actually be it would be problematic for our nation. And so then what happens to the rating of our treasury bonds? That's why I would say if you're looking super long term, 25-year outlook, 20-year outlook, maybe gold is better than treasury.
No, I hear you on that long term scenario because the long term fundamentals are really scary. Do you think that the U.S. could be one day looking at defaulting on its debt? I hate to even say it.
Mm-hmm. I think in the short term, no, we're going to get this thing worked out. I mean, Republicans, and I'm a Freedom Caucus member. We are having many discussions right now, and nobody in our conference has said anything close to, we're going to not extend the debt ceiling because, we're not even in that conversation. We know we're going to extend it. What we're trying to do is make sure that we have substantial cuts to federal spending, in year one. I mean, we just say, let's go back to pre-COVID spending levels. That just makes sense since the pandemic is over. Let's do that. That saves about 2.5 to 3 trillion over a 10-year window. And then let's continue to do the other work to get our budget in line. The problem is Joe Biden doesn't want to negotiate. And, people say, well, you guys got to try to come to terms with him or do a clean debt ceiling. Well, Joe Biden could have had his clean debt ceiling. He could have done it when Nancy Pelosi was speaker. He chose not to. He chose to have a political fight right now. And we're not going to play that game. So I anticipate we're going to do our work. We're going to continue to do it and try to get that done. I think longer term, in terms of defaulting on the debt, if you read any report, Moody's, S&P, whatever, they talk about Congress's ability to extend the debt ceiling, but they also talk about Congress's ability to be financially responsible long term. And so I do think that cooler heads are going to prevail. I think probably with different presidential leadership, cooler heads are going to prevail. We're going to get the fiscal house of the nation back in order so that our engine, our economy, the thing that makes everything else go, can hum and thrive, be the dominant economy in the world on a continuing basis.
That's what we need.